The hammer slipped from Natalie Garrison's grip for the third time that morning, splashing into the shallow creek water and sending ripples across the surface that caught the harsh Texas sunlight like shattered glass. She muttered under her breath, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand as she waded into the cold water to retrieve it, her worn boots squelching in the mud. The half-built cabin behind her stood like a skeleton against the endless blue sky, its frame exposed and vulnerable, just like she felt every single day since arriving in Eagle Pass 2 weeks ago. She had bought this land fair and square from a man in town who swore it was his to sell, showing her a deed that looked official enough. Natalie needed a fresh start, somewhere far from St. Louis, and the memories that haunted her there. Her father's debts, her mother's grave, the man she had almost married who turned out to be courting 2 other women at the same time. Texas seemed like the answer, a place where a woman of 22 could start over with nothing but determination, and the small inheritance her grandmother had left her. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, water dripping from the hammer in her hand. A man rode toward her on a massive chestnut stallion, his silhouette dark against the sun. As he drew closer, she could make out his features. Strong jaw shadowed with stubble, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes that even from a distance looked stormy. He wore a rancher's clothes, practical and worn from work, and sat his horse like someone who had been born in the saddle. Lucas Anderson pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the creek, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. The woman standing in his water looked like something out of a fever dream, all wild determination and stubborn pride, her dark blonde hair escaping from its braid, and her dress hiked up unceremoniously as she waded back to shore. She was building something on his land, on the disputed creek that had been at the center of a legal battle for 3 years now. "You are on private property," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. Not shouting, just stating a fact. Natalie climbed out of the water, holding the hammer like a weapon. "I own this land. I have a deed." Lucas dismounted in one fluid motion, ground tying his horse. He walked toward her with the confident stride of a man who knew exactly where he stood, literally and figuratively. "That deed is not worth the paper it is printed on. This creek marks the boundary of my ranch, and it has for the last 8 years. Before that, it belonged to my father for 20 years before him." "Then someone sold me land they did not own," Natalie said, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempt at confidence. "But that is not my problem. I paid good money for this property." "Who sold it to you?" Lucas asked, though he already suspected the answer. There was only one man in Eagle Pass low enough to pull such a scheme: Cyrus Webb. He had papers, legal documents. He showed me everything at his office in town. Lucas let out a long breath through his nose, removing his hat to run a hand through his hair before replacing it. "Cyrus Webb is a con man who has been running schemes in this town since he arrived 5 years ago. The sheriff knows it, everyone knows it, but he is slippery enough to avoid getting caught with anything provable." The color drained from Natalie's face. No, I saw the deed. It had seals and signatures. Forgeries, most likely. Lucas felt an unwelcome twinge of sympathy as he watched her process this information. She looked like she might be sick. "How much did you pay him?" "Everything." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Everything I had in the world, $800. Lucas swore under his breath. $800 was a small fortune, enough to build a decent life, enough to destroy someone if they lost it. "You need to go to the sheriff." "And tell him what?" "That I was foolish enough to buy land without verifying the ownership. That I trusted a man with a friendly smile and official-looking papers." Natalie's voice rose, anger replacing the shock. I am not stupid. I looked into it as much as I could. I asked questions. Everyone in town acted like Webb was a legitimate land agent. Because he pays people to say so, Lucas said. Look, Miss Garrison, Natalie Garrison, Miss Garrison, I understand this is not the news you wanted to hear, but you cannot build here. This is Anderson land, and it is not up for negotiation. Natalie looked at the cabin frame behind her, at the 2 weeks of backbreaking work she had already invested. She had blisters on her hands that had burst and reformed. Her shoulders ached from hauling timber. Her back screamed every morning when she woke up in the tent she had pitched near the creek, and now this man was telling her it was all for nothing. I have nowhere else to go, she said quietly. No money, no family, nothing. The words hit Lucas harder than he expected. He knew what it was like to have nothing, to be desperate. His father had lost everything in a drought when Lucas was 16, and only through sheer, stubborn determination had they managed to build the ranch back up. He wanted to be unmoved by her plight, to simply send her on her way and forget about the woman building a cabin on his creek, but something in her eyes stopped him. How many nails do you have? He asked. Natalie blinked, caught off guard by the question. What? Nails for your cabin? How many do you have? Maybe 3 dozen left. Why? Lucas walked over to his horse and swung back into the saddle. Stay here. Do not do any more building until I get back. Where are you going? To get more nails, he said. And then he was riding away before she could respond, leaving Natalie standing by the creek with a dripping hammer and more questions than answers. He rode back to his ranch, a sprawling property that stretched across some of the best grazing land in this part of Texas. The main house was solid and well built, a testament to years of hard work. His foreman, Pete Rawlings, was working with some horses in the corral when Lucas rode up. Boss, you are back early. Thought you were checking the north fence line, Pete called out. Change of plans. There is a woman building a cabin on the disputed creek land. Pete's eyebrows shot up. You run her off. Working on it, Lucas said, which was not exactly true, but he did not have time to explain what he was actually doing since he was not entirely sure himself. He went into the barn and found his supply of nails, a considerable amount he had ordered from the general store last month. He loaded several boxes into his saddlebags, along with some additional tools he suspected she did not have. When he rode back to the creek an hour later, Natalie was sitting on a log near her tent, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard him approach, and he could see she had been crying, though she was trying to hide it. Something in his chest tightened uncomfortably. Lucas dismounted and pulled the boxes of nails from his saddlebags. Here. You are going to need more than 3 dozen if you want to finish that cabin properly. Natalie stood, staring at the nails and then at him. I do not understand. You said I could not build here. You cannot, Lucas confirmed. This land is part of an ongoing dispute between my ranch and the property to the east, but that does not mean I am going to let you sleep in a tent while we figure this out. Figure what out? Lucas set the nails down carefully. You finish your cabin, you have somewhere to live. Meanwhile, I am going to see what can be done about getting your money back from Webb, and we are going to sort out this land situation properly. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Because Webb has gotten away with too much for too long, and I am tired of it, Lucas said. And because no one deserves to lose everything they have to a con man. I cannot pay you for the nails, Natalie said, her pride evident in every word. Did I ask you to? They stood there in the midday heat, the creek babbling between them, 2 strangers connected by circumstances neither had planned for. Finally, Natalie nodded. Thank you. I will pay you back once I get settled. Finish your cabin first, then we will talk. Lucas tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse again. As he rode away, he found himself looking back over his shoulder, watching as Natalie picked up the boxes of nails with a look of determined hope on her face. Over the next week, Lucas found reasons to ride by the creek every day. He told himself he was checking on his property, making sure the dispute did not escalate, but the truth was more complicated. He was fascinated by Natalie's determination, the way she worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, slowly transforming the skeleton of a cabin into something real and solid. On the third day, he brought lumber to replace some warped boards she had been trying to use. On the fifth day, he showed up with proper roofing materials because the scraps she had cobbled together would never survive the first serious rain. Each time, Natalie accepted his help with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, like she could not quite figure out his angle. "You are being very generous for someone who does not want me here," she said one afternoon, as they worked together to raise a wall frame. The physical work was easier with two people, and Lucas had found himself staying longer each day, helping with the more difficult aspects of construction. "I never said I did not want you here," Lucas replied, hammering a nail into place with practiced precision. "I said you could not build on disputed land. Is there a difference?" "There is." He looked at her across the frame, seeing the way the sun caught the lighter streaks in her hair, the smudge of dirt on her cheek that she kept missing when she wiped her face. "If you were trying to cheat me or steal from me, that would be different. But you are just someone who got taken advantage of, and I know what that feels like." "Someone took advantage of you?" Natalie asked, surprised. Lucas nodded, setting down his hammer. "When I was 20, a man sold me a herd of cattle at a very good price. Too good, as it turned out. They were stolen, and when the real owner tracked them down, I lost every cent I had paid plus faced potential charges for receiving stolen goods. It took me 2 years to dig out of that hole and rebuild my reputation." "What happened to the man who sold them to you?" "He disappeared before anyone could catch him, just like Webb will probably try to do if he catches wind that people are on to him." Lucas picked up his hammer again. "Which is why I went to the sheriff yesterday and filed a formal complaint. I also sent a telegram to the Texas Rangers to see if Webb has run similar schemes elsewhere." Natalie stopped working, staring at him. "You did that for me." "I did it for everyone in Eagle Pass who might be his next victim," Lucas said, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "You just happened to be the current one." But that was not entirely true, and they both knew it. There was something happening between them, something neither had planned for or knew quite how to handle. It was in the way their hands would brush when passing tools, the way they had started timing their breaks to coincide so they could sit by the creek and talk, sharing stories about their lives and dreams. Natalie told him about St. Louis, about her father's gambling debts and her mother's slow decline. Lucas told her about his father's death 3 years ago, about the weight of running the ranch alone, about the loneliness that came with being responsible for everything and everyone. 2 weeks after their first meeting, the cabin was nearly complete. It had 4 solid walls, a sturdy roof, a door that hung straight, and 2 windows that Lucas had somehow acquired from a demolished building in town. It was small but well built, and Natalie felt a surge of pride every time she looked at it. "I never could have done this without you," she said as they sat by the creek one evening, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink. "I want you to know that I appreciate everything, even though I still do not entirely understand why you helped me." Lucas picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "Maybe I am tired of being alone," he said quietly. "Maybe I saw someone who needed help and remembered what it felt like to need it myself. Maybe I just liked the look of determination on your face when you climbed out of that creek with your hammer like you were ready to fight the world." Natalie laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. "I probably looked ridiculous." "You look strong," Lucas said, turning to look at her directly. "You looked like someone who does not give up, even when everything is stacked against them. I admire that." The air between them seemed to shift, becoming charged with something unspoken. Natalie felt her heart beat faster, awareness of how close they were sitting, how the fading light made Lucas's eyes look almost black. "Lucas," she started, but was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. They both stood as Sheriff Tom Brennan rode up with 2 deputies, their faces serious. "Lucas, Miss Garrison, glad I found you both together." "What is it, Tom?" Lucas asked, immediately alert. "We arrested Cyrus Webb this afternoon. Found evidence in his office of at least 15 fraudulent land sales over the past 3 years. Forged deeds, fake seals, the whole operation." Sheriff Brennan looked at Natalie. "Miss Garrison, you are going to need to come into town tomorrow to make a statement and identify any documents you received from him." "Will I get my money back?" Natalie asked, though she already suspected the answer. The sheriff's expression was sympathetic. "Unlikely, I am afraid." Webb spent money as fast as he made it. Gambling, drinking, expensive suits. We found less than $200 in his accounts, and that is going to be split among all his victims. Natalie felt Lucas's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "So I get nothing," she said flatly. "You get justice, which is more than most con men's victims get," Sheriff Brennan said. "And there is something else. The disputed creek land that you built on. Turns out Webb actually did own that particular parcel, bought it legally 5 years ago when he first came to town. Probably intended to use it for schemes just like this one. Since he is being convicted of fraud, his assets are being seized and sold to compensate his victims." Lucas straightened. "Are you saying the land is going up for auction? First thing next month?" "Figured you would want to know, Lucas, given your interest in settling the boundary dispute." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I will expect you both in town tomorrow, early afternoon." After the sheriff left, Lucas and Natalie stood in the gathering darkness, both processing this new information. "If the land goes to auction, you could buy it," Natalie said. "Settle your boundary dispute once and for all." "I could," Lucas agreed. "Or you could buy it. With what money? I have nothing left." Lucas turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the twilight. "You could work for me. I need help at the ranch, and you have proven you are not afraid of hard work. I pay fair wages. Save up for a few months and you would have enough for a down payment at the auction. I would even loan you the rest, with the land as collateral." "Why?" Natalie asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why do you keep helping me?" Lucas reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I think you know why," he said softly. Natalie did know. She had known for days, maybe from the very beginning, that something was forming between them. It was in every shared glance, every accidental touch, every conversation that stretched longer than it needed to because neither wanted to walk away. She had tried to ignore it, to tell herself it was just gratitude or circumstance, but standing here with his hand warm against her face, she could not deny it anymore. "I am scared," she admitted. "The last time I trusted someone, I lost everything." "I know. But I am not Cyrus Webb, and I am not whoever hurt you before." Lucas's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I am just a rancher who cannot stop thinking about the woman who built a cabin on his creek." Natalie closed the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips against his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of something new. Then Lucas's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like promise and possibility and home all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Natalie rested her forehead against his chest. "I do not want to work for you," she said. Lucas stiffened, starting to pull away, but she held on to him. "I want to be your partner," she continued. "In the ranch, in life, in everything. But I need time, Lucas. I need to find my footing again, to prove to myself that I can stand on my own before I lean on someone else." "I can give you time," Lucas said, relief flooding through him. "I can give you all the time you need, but I want you to know something, Natalie Garrison. I am not going anywhere. I am not going to disappear or betray you or let you down. I am going to be right here, waiting for you to be ready." They sealed the promise with another kiss, softer this time, full of tenderness rather than urgency. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, infinite points of light bearing witness to the beginning of something real. The next morning, they rode into Eagle Pass together. The town was buzzing with news of Webb's arrest, people stopping them on the street to ask questions or share their own stories of narrow escapes from his schemes. Natalie gave her statement to the sheriff, identifying the forged deed and recounting every detail of her transactions with Webb. Afterward, Lucas took her to the general store to buy supplies for her cabin. "You are going to need more than a hammer and some nails to make that place livable," he said, loading her arms with blankets, dishes, cooking utensils, and food staples. "Lucas, this is too much," Natalie protested as the pile grew higher. "Consider it a loan, same as the rest," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. "You can pay me back when you are a successful landowner." The store owner, Mrs. Helena Price, watched them with knowing eyes. "It is good to see you smile again, Lucas Anderson. Your father would have been pleased." Lucas's expression softened. "Thank you, Helena." "And you, young lady," Mrs. Price turned to Natalie, "do not let this one get away. Good men are rare in this world, and ranchers who bring nails to ladies building cabins are even rarer." Natalie felt herself blush, but met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I do not intend to, madam." They loaded the supplies onto Lucas's wagon and drove back to the creek, talking easily about everything and nothing. Natalie found herself watching the way Lucas handled the horses, the confident competence in every movement, the way he pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land they passed through. "My father bought this ranch in 1871, Lucas explained as they drove through his property. "He came from Tennessee after the war, wanted a fresh start like so many others. This was rough country then, harder than it is now. He built everything from nothing, just him and my mother working side by side." "Where is your mother now?" Natalie asked. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter, too quick for the doctor to even make it out from town." Lucas's hands tightened on the reins. "My father never really recovered. He kept working, kept building, but there was a sadness in him after that. I think he died as much from a broken heart as from the pneumonia that took him." "I am sorry," Natalie said, touching his arm gently. "It taught me something important, though," Lucas continued. "It taught me that life is short and unpredictable, and when you find something worth holding on to, you hold on with everything you have. My father waited too long to say a lot of things, to do a lot of things. I do not want to make that mistake." They reached the cabin as afternoon was giving way to evening. Together, they unloaded the supplies and began arranging them inside. With furniture borrowed from Lucas's ranch and the new household items, the cabin began to feel less like a construction project and more like a home. "I should get back," Lucas said eventually, though he made no move toward the door. "My foreman is probably wondering where I have been all day." "Thank you," Natalie said, gesturing to encompass everything, the cabin, the supplies, the help, the hope. For all of it. Lucas pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a thoroughness that left no doubt about his intentions or feelings. "I will come by tomorrow," he promised against her lips. "And the day after that, and the day after that, until you get tired of seeing me." "That might take a while," Natalie said with a smile. "Good. That is what I am counting on." After Lucas left, Natalie stood in her cabin, looking at the sturdy walls and solid floor, at the supplies stacked neatly in the corner and the bed frame Lucas had brought over. It was not much, not compared to what she had lost, but it was hers in a way nothing had ever been before. She had built this with her own hands, with help from a man who asked for nothing in return except the chance to keep helping. She slept well that night, better than she had in months, lulled by the sound of the creek and the feeling of safety that came from locked doors and solid walls. True to his word, Lucas came by the next day and the day after and the day after that. Sometimes he brought more supplies or materials to improve the cabin. Sometimes he brought food that his ranch cook had prepared. Sometimes he just brought himself, and they would sit by the creek talking until the stars came out. A week later, Lucas made his proposition official. "Come work at the ranch," he said. "Not as a ranch hand, but managing the household. My house has been falling apart without anyone to look after it. I need someone who can manage supplies, oversee repairs, handle the cooking and cleaning. I will pay you $40 a month plus room and board." Natalie considered the offer carefully. $40 a month was generous, more than fair for the work described. In 6 months, she would have enough saved for the down payment on the creek land, but there was another element to consider. "If I am living at your ranch, people will talk," she said. "Let them talk. You will have your own room in the house, completely separate from mine. Everything proper and above board." Lucas paused. "Unless you would rather stay here in the cabin, I understand if you want your independence." "The cabin has no heat for winter, no real kitchen, and I am getting tired of bathing in the creek," Natalie said with a laugh. "I accept your offer, Lucas Anderson, but with one condition." "What is that?" "We do this properly. I work for you, I save my money, I buy my land. No loans, no charity. I want to earn this myself." Lucas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she could have the land as a gift, that he had more than enough money to buy it outright for her. But he understood pride, understood the need to prove oneself capable and independent. "Agreed," he said, offering his hand to shake. Natalie took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she pulled him closer. "You are a good man, Lucas Anderson." "I am a selfish man," he corrected, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am using any excuse I can think of to keep you close." "Then I suppose we are both selfish," Natalie said, "because I am using any excuse I can think of to stay." They kissed by the creek where they had first met, where she had stood with a dripping hammer and more courage than common sense, where he had made the decision to help a stranger that changed both their lives. Moving to the ranch was an adjustment. Lucas's house was larger than Natalie had expected. A sprawling structure with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, a dining room, and even a study filled with books and ranch records. It had the neglected air of a place where a man had been living alone for too long, but the bones were good, the structure sound. Natalie threw herself into the work with the same determination she had shown building her cabin. She cleaned and organized, repaired and improved, turning the house from a bachelor's dwelling into a real home. She learned to cook for the ranch hands who came in for meals, to manage the complex logistics of feeding and housing the men who worked the cattle, to handle the endless details that kept a large operation running smoothly. Lucas watched her transform his house with a mixture of amazement and growing love. She fit into his life so seamlessly it was like she had always been there, like the house had been waiting for her all along. The ranch hands adored her, appreciating the hot meals and clean bunkhouse, and the way she remembered their names and asked about their families. His foreman, Pete, told him privately that it was the best thing that had ever happened to the ranch, but it was the private moments Lucas treasured most. Evenings when they would sit on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Early mornings when he would find her in the kitchen, sleep soft and beautiful, making coffee before the rest of the household woke. Afternoons when he would come in from working the herds to find her mending clothes or reading one of his books, and she would look up with a smile that made his chest tight. They were careful to maintain propriety, never alone behind closed doors for too long, always conscious of appearances. But the attraction between them grew stronger every day, building like a summer storm on the horizon. One evening in late August, nearly 2 months after Natalie had moved to the ranch, they were sitting on the porch after supper. The air was thick with heat, and Natalie had pinned her hair up off her neck, exposing the graceful curve of her throat. Lucas found himself staring, wanting to press his lips against that vulnerable spot. "You are looking at me," Natalie said without turning her head. "I am always looking at you," Lucas admitted. "I cannot seem to help myself." Natalie turned to face him, her expression serious. "Lucas, we need to talk about what this is, what we are doing." "I know what I am doing," Lucas said. "I am falling in love with you." "I fell in love with you somewhere between the creek and the cabin and every moment since. I tried tried to be practical and sensible, but I have never been very good at denying what I want, and I want you, Natalie. Not just for now, not just until you get your land. Forever." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since you showed up with those nails, since you decided to help a stranger for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. But I am scared, Lucas. I am scared of losing myself in this, of becoming dependent on you, of losing everything again." Lucas stood and pulled her to her feet, taking both her hands in his. "You could never lose yourself, Natalie. You are the strongest person I know. And as for depending on me, we would depend on each other. That is what partners do. That is what marriage is." "Marriage," Natalie's breath caught. "Yes, marriage. I am not asking you to be my housekeeper or my employee or even just my lover. I am asking you to be my wife." Lucas got down on one knee, still holding her hands. "Natalie Garrison, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me, that I will never let you down, that together we can build something even stronger than that cabin by the creek?" Natalie looked down at him, at this man who had changed everything, who had shown her that not everyone was out to hurt her, that sometimes people helped simply because they could. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas stood and kissed her, deep and passionate, right there on the porch where anyone could see. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, he rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have a ring yet. I will buy you the finest one I can find in town tomorrow." "I do not need a ring to know this is real," Natalie said, but her eyes were shining with happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Eagle Pass, with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore a dress that Mrs. Price had helped her sew, simple but elegant in ivory silk, that the general store owner had ordered special from Dallas. Lucas wore his best suit, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal clothes, until Natalie took his hand and smiled at him. And then he relaxed, his expression transforming into pure joy. The wedding was short but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed Natalie with such enthusiasm that several people in the congregation laughed and applauded. They held the reception at the ranch, with tables set up under the trees and food prepared by several of the town ladies who had taken Natalie under their wing. As the sun set and musicians began playing, Lucas led Natalie in their first dance as husband and wife. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Anderson?" he asked, pulling her close. "It feels like coming home," Natalie said honestly. "Like everything I went through, all the pain and loss and fear, was leading me here to you. I promise I will spend every day making sure you never regret this," Lucas said seriously. "I know you will." "But Lucas, I need to tell you something." Natalie looked up at him. "I do not want you to buy the creek land at the auction next week." Lucas stopped dancing, confused. "But that was the whole plan. You were saving money to buy it yourself." "I was, but I have been thinking about it and I realized something. That land represents everything I lost, everything I was trying to prove. But I do not need to prove anything anymore. I do not need that land to feel secure or independent or worthy. What I need is right here with you." Natalie touched his chest over his heart. "So I want you to buy the land, add it to the ranch. Let it be ours together, part of our future instead of my past." Lucas was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Are you sure? I do not want you to give up something important to you." "I am not giving it up. I am choosing something better. I am choosing us." Natalie smiled. "Besides, that cabin is still there and I've grown rather fond of it. We could use it as a retreat, somewhere to go when we want to be alone." "I like that idea," Lucas said, starting to dance again. "A cabin by the creek where I can have you all to myself." "You already have me all to yourself," Natalie pointed out. "True, but now it is official." Lucas spun her around, making her laugh. "You are stuck with me now, Natalie Anderson. Good. That is exactly where I want to be." The weeks after the wedding were a period of adjustment and discovery. Natalie moved her things into Lucas's room, their room now, and they began the process of learning to live together not as employer and employee, or even just as courting couple, but as husband and wife. Lucas was attentive and patient, taking his time to learn what Natalie liked, what made her sigh with pleasure, what made her laugh. Natalie found herself opening up in ways she never had before, trusting Lucas with her fears and dreams, her body and her heart. The nights were a revelation, passionate and tender by turns. Lucas made her feel cherished and desired, beautiful and strong. Natalie discovered depths of feeling she had not known she was capable of, giving herself to her husband with complete trust and abandon. But it was the everyday moments that built their marriage into something unshakable. Working side by side in the kitchen, Lucas reading ledgers while Natalie mended clothes, riding out together to check on the herds, sitting on the porch in the evenings talking about their days. They argued sometimes, of course, learning each other's boundaries and triggers, but they always worked through it, always came back to the fundamental truth that they loved each other and were stronger together than apart. The land auction came and went, with Lucas purchasing the creek property for a reasonable price now that it was officially available for sale. He had the deed made out in both their names, Natalie and Lucas Anderson, joint owners. When he showed it to her, Natalie cried, overwhelmed by the symbolism of seeing her name on a legitimate legal document alongside her husband's. "This is ours now," Lucas said, holding her close. "Everything I have is ours. The ranch, the land, all of it. We are partners in every sense of the word." As autumn arrived and the brutal summer heat gave way to cooler temperatures, Natalie began to notice changes in herself. She was tired more often, nauseated in the mornings, emotional over small things. It took her nearly 2 weeks to recognize the signs, and when she did, she was terrified and elated in equal measure. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, unable to hold the secret any longer. "I am pregnant," she said simply, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Lucas froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly. Then a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until it looked like it might split his face in two. "We are going to have a baby." "In the spring, if my calculations are right," Natalie said, relief flooding through her at his obvious joy. Lucas set down his coffee cup and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Natalie, this is the best news. The absolute best news." They sat together on the porch, Lucas's hand on Natalie's still flat stomach, talking about the future in concrete terms now. Names they liked, changes they would need to make to the house, how they would manage with a baby in their lives. It felt real in a way nothing else had, permanent and important. Winter came to Texas, not as harsh as it would have been further north, but cold enough. Natalie's pregnancy progressed normally, her body changing in ways that fascinated and sometimes frustrated her. Lucas was attentive to the point of being overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, worrying over every twinge and complaint. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Natalie told him one day after he had tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their normal work." "Other women are not you," Lucas said stubbornly. "Other women are not carrying my child." Natalie softened, recognizing the fear beneath his concern. She took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly. "Feel that. That is your son or daughter growing strong because we are both healthy and well cared for. You are allowed to worry, but you cannot wrap me in cotton and expect me to sit still for 9 months." Lucas sighed. "I know. I just want everything to be perfect. I want you both to be safe. We are safe. We have each other, and that is all we need." They spent Christmas at the ranch, hosting a dinner for the ranch hands who had nowhere else to go for the holiday. Natalie cooked for days, preparing traditional dishes and creating new memories in their home. Lucas gave her a beautifully carved cradle he had been working on in secret, and Natalie gave him a leather-bound journal with their initials embossed on the cover, for recording the stories and history of their growing family. As winter turned to spring, Natalie grew larger and more uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, her ankles swelled, and she felt clumsy and ungainly. But Lucas never stopped telling her she was beautiful, never stopped finding ways to make her comfortable, never stopped looking at her with such love and wonder that it made her heart ache. The baby came on a warm April evening, arriving after 12 hours of labor that tested Natalie's strength and resolve. Lucas stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her she was strong and brave and doing beautifully. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, they both wept with relief and joy. "He is beautiful," Lucas said, carefully holding his newborn son for the first time. "Natalie, he is perfect. You are perfect." They named him Thomas William Anderson after both their fathers. Thomas had Lucas's dark hair and Natalie's nose, and from the first moment, he was the center of their world. The first few weeks were exhausting and overwhelming, full of sleepless nights and constant feedings, and learning how to care for a tiny human who depended on them for everything. But Lucas and Natalie navigated it together, taking turns walking Thomas when he cried, marveling over every sound and movement, falling more in love with each other as they fell in love with their son. As spring moved into summer, they found their rhythm as a family. Natalie managed the household with Thomas in a sling against her chest, somehow accomplishing everything she needed to while caring for an infant. Lucas balanced ranch work with time at home, never missing the chance to hold his son or help his wife. One evening in June, almost exactly a year after they had first met, Lucas suggested they walk down to the cabin by the creek. Natalie agreed, settling Thomas in a basket they could carry between them. The cabin stood solid and weathered, a testament to Natalie's determination and Lucas's help. They had added some improvements over the months, making it more comfortable for their occasional retreats there. Inside, they laid Thomas in his basket, watching him sleep peacefully. "You ever think about that first day?" Lucas asked, pulling Natalie into his arms. "When you were standing in the creek with that hammer, looking like you were ready to fight anyone who tried to stop you." "I think about it all the time," Natalie admitted. "I was so scared and so stubborn. I had no idea what I was doing. You were building a home. You were fighting for your future." "I was," Natalie agreed, "but my future turned out to be so much more than a cabin on a disputed creek. My future turned out to be you and Thomas and all of this." She gestured to encompass everything: the cabin, the ranch, the life they had built together. Lucas kissed her softly. "I love you, Natalie Anderson, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. Thank you for bringing me nails that day. Thank you for needing them." They stood together in the cabin doorway, watching the creek flow past, watching the sun set over the Texas landscape, watching their son sleep peacefully nearby. It was not the future either of them had planned or expected, but it was so much better than anything they could have imagined. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Natalie handling the business side while Lucas managed the cattle and land. They expanded their holdings, bought adjacent properties when they came available, built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. Thomas grew from infant to toddler to young boy, inheriting his father's love of horses and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Natalie became pregnant again, delivering a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth on a snowy December morning. 2 years later, another son arrived, James Michael, completing their family. The house that had once been too large and too empty now rang with children's laughter and running feet. Natalie sometimes thought about that desperate woman who had arrived in Eagle Pass with nothing but determination and false hope, who had tried to build a cabin on disputed land with no idea what she was doing. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. But she was grateful for that woman's courage, for the choice to keep building even when everything seemed hopeless, for the accident of fate that had placed her on Lucas Anderson's land. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Natalie returned to the cabin by the creek, leaving the children with Pete and his wife for the night. The cabin had become their special place, somewhere they retreated to remember where they started, to reconnect away from the demands of children and ranch and daily life. 10 years, Lucas said, pulling Natalie close as they sat on the cabin porch watching the stars. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have always been here." "Both are true," Natalie said. "We have built an entire life together, Lucas. 3 children, a successful ranch, a home full of love. But I still remember that first moment I saw you riding toward me, looking stern and intimidating on your big horse." "I was not stern," Lucas protested. "You were absolutely stern. You told me I was on private property and I could not build there. And you told me you owned the land and it was not your problem." I disagreed. Lucas laughed at the memory. "I should have known right then that I was in trouble. You were so fierce, so certain you were right." "I was wrong, though," Natalie pointed out. "About the land, maybe. But not about fighting for what you wanted, not about refusing to give up. Those qualities are what made me fall in love with you." Natalie turned in his arms so she could see his face. "I was thinking about something earlier. What if Webb had actually owned that land legitimately? What if I had built my cabin and you had left me alone? We might never have gotten to know each other." "No," Lucas said firmly. We still would have ended up together. I would have found some excuse to keep coming back, to keep checking on you. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but I believe we were meant to find each other, Natalie. Everything that happened, all the good and the bad, led us here. I believe that too, Natalie said, kissing him deeply. And I would not change a single moment, not even the hard parts, because they brought me to you. They made love that night in the cabin where their story began, with the creek singing outside and the stars watching overhead, and it felt like coming full circle, like completing a promise made years ago by two people who had no idea what they were beginning. In the morning, they returned to the ranch and their children and their busy, full lives. Thomas was 9 now, already a capable rider who helped with ranch work after his lessons. Sarah was 6, bright and curious, and constantly asking questions about everything. James was 4, a bundle of energy who kept everyone on their toes. Natalie stood on the porch of their house, watching Lucas work with Thomas in the corral, teaching him how to rope cattle. Sarah was sitting nearby with a book, occasionally looking up to watch her father and brother. James was napping inside, worn out from a morning of play. This was her life now, so different from anything she could have imagined in those dark days after her mother died and her world fell apart. She had come to Texas looking for land and found so much more. She had found home, family, love, purpose. She had found herself, the strongest version of herself, the woman who could build cabins and raise children and run a ranch and love with her whole heart. Lucas looked up from the corral and caught her eye, his face breaking into the smile she loved so much, the one that was just for her. He handed the rope to Thomas and walked over to the porch, pulling her into his arms despite being dusty from work. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, kissing her forehead. "How lucky I am," Natalie said simply. "How everything went wrong and somehow led to everything going right." "We are both lucky," Lucas corrected. "Lucky I went to check on that creek that day. Lucky you were too stubborn to leave when I told you to. Lucky we both decided to trust each other despite every reason not to. Lucky you brought me nails," Natalie added with a smile. "Lucky you needed them." They stood together on the porch of their home, watching their son practice roping, watching their daughter read in the shade, listening to the sounds of their youngest child stirring from his nap. The ranch stretched out around them, thousands of acres of Texas land that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately brought them together. Lucas had been right that first day when he said the land was not up for negotiation. But everything else had been negotiable, open to change and growth, and the unexpected grace of finding love where you least expected it. 20 years after that first meeting by the creek, Lucas and Natalie sat on their porch watching the sunset, their hands intertwined the way they had been for 2 decades. Their children were grown now, Thomas running his own section of the ranch with his young wife, Sarah teaching school in Eagle Pass and courting a lawyer from Dallas, James attending university in Austin, studying to be a veterinarian. "You think they know how lucky they are?" Lucas asked, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Our children, I mean. Do you think they understand what it took to build all this?" "I think they know we love them, and that is enough for now," Natalie said. "When they are older, when they have their own struggles and triumphs, they will understand better. Just like I did not really understand my mother until I became a mother myself." Lucas squeezed her hand. "You have been an amazing mother, Natalie, an amazing wife, an amazing partner. I could not have built any of this without you." "We built it together," Natalie corrected. "From that first cabin by the creek to everything we have now, together." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of shared life, of knowing each other so well that words are not always necessary. The ranch was quiet in the evening, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. "I want to go back to the cabin," Natalie said suddenly. "Tomorrow, just you and me, like we used to before the children were born." Lucas looked at her, seeing the woman he had fallen in love with still shining through despite the silver in her hair and the lines around her eyes. "I would like that. We can pack a basket and spend the day there, just the two of us." They did exactly that, riding out to the creek the next morning with food and wine and blankets. The cabin had weathered well over the years, maintained carefully because it meant something to both of them, a physical reminder of where they started. Inside, they spread blankets on the floor and ate their lunch, talking about their children and their plans for the ranch and their hopes for the future. When the meal was finished, Lucas pulled Natalie into his arms, holding her close. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" he asked. "When I told you this was private property, I said I owned the land and I had a deed," Natalie replied with a smile. "You also said your refusal to leave was not your problem. You were so fierce, so determined." Lucas kissed her softly. "I fell in love with you in that moment, I think. Before I even knew your name, before I understood what was happening, something in me recognized something in you." "I was terrified," Natalie admitted. "Of you, of the situation, of my future. But I could not show it because showing fear felt like giving up." "You have never given up on anything in your life," Lucas said. "Not on building that cabin, not on us, not on our family. You are the strongest person I know, Natalie." "I am strong because you gave me the foundation to be strong," Natalie said. "You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You helped me when I could not help myself. You loved me before I knew how to accept love." They made love in the cabin one more time, slower and gentler than in their youth, but no less passionate, no less meaningful. Afterward, they lay together on the blankets, Natalie's head on Lucas's chest, listening to his heartbeat and the creek outside. "Thank you," Natalie said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me that day by the creek, for bringing me nails, for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to, for loving me for 30 years and making every single day an adventure." "Thank you for building your cabin on my disputed creek," Lucas replied. "Thank you for being too stubborn to leave. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for 3 beautiful children and a lifetime of happiness." They stayed at the cabin until sunset, reluctant to leave their special place, the spot where their story began and continued to unfold. As they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Natalie looked back one more time at the cabin standing solid by the creek, and she smiled. That cabin represented the best decision she had ever made, not because the land turned out to be valuable or because it led to security, but because it led to Lucas. It led to love and family and home, to everything that mattered. When they reached the ranch house, now expanded and improved many times over the years, Thomas and his wife were waiting on the porch with their infant grandson, Lucas and Natalie's first grandchild. The baby was 3 months old, with his grandfather's dark hair and his grandmother's eyes, and he represented the future, the continuation of everything they had built together. Lucas held his grandson carefully, marveling at the tiny perfection of him, at the realization that this child carried both their legacies forward. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the Anderson Ranch. Welcome to your family." Natalie stood beside her husband, looking at their son holding his own son, at the home they had built literally and figuratively, at the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. She thought about that woman who had arrived in Eagle, Pass alone and desperate, who had tried to build a cabin with no experience and no help, who had almost given up more than once. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, Tell her to hold on because everything was about to change. Tell her that the stern-looking rancher on the big horse was going to become the most important person in her world. But maybe it was better that she had not known. Maybe the surprise of it all, the unexpected grace of finding love in the most unlikely circumstances, made it more precious, more meaningful. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her distant expression. "About nails," Natalie said with a smile. "About cowboys who bring them to women building cabins on disputed creeks. About how the smallest acts of kindness can change everything." Lucas shifted the baby to one arm so he could put the other around his wife. "I brought you nails because I could not stand to see you struggling. I stayed because I fell in love with you. I married you because I could not imagine my life without you. And I have loved you every single day for 3 decades because you make loving you the easiest thing in the world." "I love you too," Natalie said, leaning into him. "More than words can say." They stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by family, watching the sun set over their land, over the ranch they had built together, over the life they had created from nothing but courage and determination and love. In the distance, if you knew where to look, you could just make out the cabin by the creek, standing solid and true, a monument to the beginning of everything. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Lucas and Natalie grew old together, their love deepening and maturing the way good things do with time. They never stopped holding hands, never stopped seeking each other out, never stopped finding ways to surprise and delight each other. When Lucas was 75 and Natalie 73, they took one last ride down to the cabin by the creek. It was harder now, their bodies protesting the journey in ways they never had when they were young, but they were determined. This place meant too much to miss, represented too much of their history and their love. They sat on the cabin porch, holding hands and watching the water flow past, talking about all the years, all the memories, all the love that had started right here in this spot. "I would do it all again," Lucas said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again in a heartbeat, Natalie." "And I would choose you," Natalie replied. "1,000 times over I would choose you." As the sun set on their last visit to the cabin together, casting everything in golden light, they sat in perfect peace and contentment. They had built a good life, raised good children, created something lasting and meaningful. They had loved each other with everything they had, holding nothing back, and that love had sustained them through everything. Lucas lived to be 82, passing peacefully in his sleep with Natalie holding his hand. She followed him 2 years later, having lived a full and rich life of 84 years. They were buried side by side in the family cemetery on the ranch, under a large oak tree with a view of the land they loved. The cabin by the creek still stands, maintained carefully by generations of Andersons who know the story of their grandparents and great-grandparents, who understand that this simple structure represents the foundation of everything their family became. Young couples sometimes go there to propose, to start their own love stories in the place where Lucas and Natalie started theirs. The creek still flows, constant and eternal, singing its endless song. And if you stand there very quietly on a summer evening, some say you can still feel the presence of a stubborn woman with a hammer and a kind-hearted rancher who brought her nails. 2 people who found each other against all odds and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Their story became legend in Eagle Pass, told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but always true at its core. A story about courage and kindness, about trust and determination, about how the smallest gesture of generosity can change everything, about how love finds a way even in the most unexpected circumstances. Thomas Anderson, their oldest son, ensured that the story was written down and preserved, wanting future generations to know exactly how it all began. He wrote about his mother's arrival in Eagle Pass, about the con man and the disputed land, about his father's decision to help a stranger, about the nails that started everything. But more than the facts, he captured the spirit of his parents' relationship, the deep and abiding love that sustained them through decades, the partnership that made them both stronger, the joy they found in each other and in the life they built together. The Anderson Ranch continued to prosper for generations, always owned and operated by descendants of Lucas and Natalie, always honoring the values they established: hard work, fair dealing, kindness to those in need, and love as the foundation of everything. The story of Lucas and Natalie Anderson, of the rancher who found a woman building a cabin on his disputed creek and brought her nails instead of sending her away, became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of choosing compassion over self-interest, of taking a chance on someone unexpected, of believing in love even when circumstances seem impossible. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Lucas and Natalie Anderson are together still, holding hands and watching over the land they loved, the family they created, the legacy they left behind. Their love story, which began with a hammer and some nails, with a stubborn woman and a kind-hearted rancher, with a cabin on a disputed creek, continues to inspire and endure. Because real love, the kind that transforms lives and builds futures and lasts beyond lifetimes, never really ends. It just keeps flowing forward, like a creek through Texas, constant and eternal and true, nourishing everything it touches, sustaining life in all its forms, reminding us that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings, and that a simple act of kindness, like bringing someone nails when they need them most, can change not just 2 lives but generations to come. And that makes all the difference.